In this figure, we look at sources of metabolic energy supporting prolonged moderate exercise in trained versus untrained individuals. The two classes of nutrients that we'll look at are carbohydrates and fats. As far as carbohydrates as sources of metabolic energy, think of them as fast release. The breakdown of carbohydrates, whether it be glycogen breakdown into glucose or intracellular glucose catabolism to produce ATP, pretty straightforward, pretty quick, ATP yield good. But of course the downside is the body's carbohydrate stores are limited to glycogen reserves in liver and muscle. They can become depleted pretty quickly. Fats as sources of metabolic energy to produce ATP, certainly we can do that. It's a much more complicated process. It's fairly laborious, takes time. Gram for gram, the ATP yield is good, but a big plus is the body's fat reserves are enormous if we could simply tap into them quickly. So then let's go ahead and look at prolonged exercise in an untrained person. Maybe this is somebody doing a long distance run. Note that most of the ATP produced to support that activity comes from the breakdown of carbohydrates. Glycogen breakdown to glucose followed by intracellular catabolism of glucose. There is some ATP to support the exercise that comes from fat breakdown, but because it's so slow, that process only accounts for half or less than half of the ATP produced. Now at some point, and that point's going to vary from person to person, we run into a depletion of our glycogen source. They simply run out. We don't have glucose availability now to produce ATP quickly enough, and it's going to be very difficult to continue the exercise. We say that a person has reached peripheral fatigue. Sometimes called the bonk. We're hitting the wall. Continuing exercise is going to be very hard. Now, could we perhaps depend upon breakdown of fats to produce ATP quickly enough to make up that difference? The answer is no. Why? Because the process is simply too slow. So then, what happens in the trained athlete? What occurs as a result of endurance training? In endurance training, there are quite a few changes that happen physiologically in the human body, many of them beyond the scope of this video. But the one that is pertinent to our current discussion is increased expression of lipases to facilitate and accelerate the fat breakdown process to produce energy. So then, if we look at our exercise in a trained individual, note that fat breakdown is accounting for much more ATP production than in the untrained individual, and as a consequence, less dependence on the breakdown of carbohydrates. Our trained athlete can run longer without bonking than the untrained individual. So to sum this up, earlier and magnified use of fats during exercise in trained individuals results in fat supplying a greater percentage of energy even before glycogen has become depleted. This enhances endurance because glycogen stores, which are a major indicator of muscular stamina, would last longer.